The moment you hear this, something inside you will start connecting the dots, because the truth is not everyone who walked away from your life did it for the reason you think, and what you are about to realize right now is something God has been trying to show you for a long time, but you were too emotionally attached to see it clearly, because you thought they left because you were not enough, because you made a mistake, because you failed somehow. But what if I told you that God just exposed the real reason they walked away, and it had nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with what they were not ready to handle in you? Because some people don't leave when you're at your worst, they leave when you start stepping into your true power, and that is the part nobody talks about, because it's easier to blame yourself than to accept that your growth made someone uncomfortable. And right now, if you're thinking about that one person who suddenly changed, who suddenly became distant, who stopped showing the same energy they once had, this message is not random, this is confirmation, because God doesn't remove people without revealing something, and sometimes the revelation doesn't come immediately, it comes after the pain, after the confusion, after the sleepless nights where you kept replaying everything in your mind trying to understand what went wrong. But the truth is, nothing went wrong, something went right. Something shifted inside you that no longer aligned with them. And they felt it before you even understood it yourself, and instead of growing with you, they chose to walk away because your evolution required a version of them they were not willing to become. And that is not your failure, that is their limitation, and I know it hurts because you were real with them, you gave your time, your energy, your loyalty, you showed up in ways that most people don't, and still they left. And that's the part that confuses you the most, because you keep asking, how can someone leave when they know how genuine you were? But that's exactly why they left. Because real energy exposes fake intentions, growth exposes comfort zones, and light exposes what people try to hide, and when you started becoming more aware, more aligned, more focused, you unintentionally started revealing things in them they were not ready to confront, and instead of facing that, they chose distance. Because distance is easier than transformation, silence is easier than honesty, and leaving is easier than leveling up, and God saw everything you didn't see, God heard conversations you were not part of, God felt intentions you trusted blindly, and when the time was right, He allowed the separation not to punish you but to protect the version of you that is becoming unstoppable, because if they had stayed, they would have slowed you down, distracted you, drained you, and you would have kept pouring into someone who was never meant to grow with you. And sometimes the biggest blessing doesn't feel like a blessing at first, it feels like rejection, it feels like loss, it feels like confusion, but in reality it is divine redirection, and you're not losing people, you're losing illusions, illusions of who you thought they were, illusions of what you thought the connection meant, illusions that kept you emotionally invested in something that was never stable to begin with, and now that illusion is breaking, and yes, it hurts, but it's also freeing you in ways you will soon understand, because the truth is, some people are assigned to your life only for a season, not for a lifetime, and when their role is complete, God removes them even if your heart still wants them to stay, and that is where faith becomes difficult, because you have to trust what God is doing even when your emotions are pulling you in the opposite direction. And right now this is your confirmation that what left your life was not meant to carry you into your next level, because where you are going requires clarity, strength, focus, and alignment, and not everyone can go there with you, and the sooner you accept that, the sooner you will stop chasing closure from people who were never meant to explain themselves, because some exits are explanations in themselves, and you don't need words when actions have already revealed the truth. And I know there is a part of you that still wants answers. Still wants to understand why it ended the way it did, but the deeper truth is this: if someone can walk away from you without fighting to stay, without trying to fix things, without valuing what you had, then their absence is the answer you've been looking for, because real connections don't disappear without resistance, real people don't vanish without communication, real love doesn't leave without reason, and if it did, then it was never as real as you believed it was. And that realization is painful, but it is also powerful because it shifts your focus from what you lost to what you deserve. And what you deserve is not confusion, not inconsistency, not emotional distance, but clarity, effort, presence, and alignment, and God is preparing you for that, even if right now it feels like everything is falling apart. Because sometimes things have to fall apart so better things can fall into place, and what you thought was a loss is actually space being created for something greater, something more aligned, something that won't leave you questioning your worth or doubting your value. And until that arrives, this season is about you, about rebuilding your energy, reclaiming your focus, and understanding your value without needing validation from anyone else, because the moment you stop chasing people who walked away is the moment you start attracting people who are meant to stay, and that shift changes everything. And what you are beginning to understand now, even if it's slowly, even if your heart is still catching up to the truth your spirit already knows, is that not every goodbye is meant to be chased, not every silence is meant to be filled, and not every person who left your life deserves a second explanation or a second chance, because sometimes God removes people in a way that feels sudden to you but was already decided in the unseen long before it ever showed up in your reality, and that's why it felt confusing, because on the surface everything looked normal. Conversations seemed fine. Energy didn't feel completely off, but deep down there were shifts happening that you couldn't fully explain, small changes in behavior, subtle distance, a different tone, a different presence, and you noticed it but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe that something real could be slipping away, and that's where most people get stuck, trying to hold on to something that God is already pulling away from them, because we tend to fight for what feels familiar even when it no longer feels right. And that internal conflict creates the pain, not just their absence but your resistance to accept it. And the truth is, you weren't wrong for caring, you weren't wrong for loving deeply, you weren't wrong for giving your energy. But you have to understand that just because you were real doesn't mean they were ready, and readiness is everything, because a person can appreciate you, admire you, even care about you in their own limited way, but still not be capable of showing up at the level you require, and when that gap becomes too big, something has to break, and in your case, they chose to walk away instead of growing into the version that could meet you where you are, and that decision says more about their capacity than your value, but it took this separation for you to start seeing that clearly, because when someone is still in your life, you tend to justify their behavior, you tend to excuse their inconsistency, you tend to overlook the things that don't align because you're emotionally invested. But distance removes the illusion. Distance reveals patterns, distance exposes truths that proximity keeps hidden, and now that they are no longer there, you can finally see what you couldn't see before, and that clarity is uncomfortable because it forces you to accept that you were holding on to potential instead of reality, you were loving who they could become instead of who they actually were. And that's a hard realization because it makes you question your own judgment, your own decisions, your own trust, but don't let that turn into self-blame, because loving someone deeply is not a mistake. Ignoring your intuition is the lesson, and now you are learning it, not in theory but through experience, and that kind of lesson changes you permanently. It sharpens your awareness, it strengthens your boundaries, it teaches you to listen to the subtle signals instead of waiting for obvious proof, and that is growth, even if it came through pain. And what you also need to understand is that some people don't walk away because they don't feel anything. They walk away because they feel too much and they don't know how to handle it, because your presence challenged them, your energy pushed them, your mindset made them confront things within themselves they were avoiding, and instead of rising to that challenge, they chose escape, because not everyone is ready to face their own truth, not everyone is willing to evolve. And when they meet someone who naturally operates at a higher level emotionally, mentally, spiritually, it creates pressure, and pressure either builds diamonds or breaks what is weak, and in this case, it revealed their limits, not your flaws. And I know there are moments when you still wonder if things could have been different, if maybe you said something wrong, did something wrong, reacted differently, maybe they would have stayed, but that kind of thinking keeps you trapped in a loop that leads nowhere. Because the outcome was never based on a single moment, it was based on a pattern, a pattern of misalignment, a pattern of imbalance, a pattern where you were giving more than they were capable of reciprocating, and eventually that imbalance always collapses, because anything that is not equally supported cannot sustain itself, and that's exactly what happened. It collapsed, not because you didn't try enough, but because it was never meant to be carried by you alone. And now you're in this space where everything feels quiet, where their absence is louder than their presence ever was, where memories come back randomly, where certain songs, places, moments trigger emotions you thought you had already processed, and that's part of it, that's part of the release, because healing is not linear, it doesn't happen in a straight line, it comes in waves. Some days you feel strong, detached, clear, and other days you feel it all over again like it just happened, and that doesn't mean you're going backwards, it means you're going deeper. And every time you process those emotions instead of suppressing them, you're breaking the attachment little by little, you're reclaiming your energy piece by piece, and one day you will wake up and realize that the thought of them no longer controls your mood, no longer affects your peace, no longer holds power over your mind, and that is the moment you truly move forward, not when you forget them, but when you no longer feel the need to go back, and that's where God is guiding you, not just to move on, but to rise above, to become someone who no longer settles for half-hearted connections, who no longer ignores red flags, who no longer sacrifices their peace for temporary companionship, because the version of you that existed before this experience would have accepted less just to keep someone, but the version of you that is emerging now understands that peace is more valuable than presence, clarity is more important than comfort, and alignment is non-negotiable, and that shift is powerful, because it changes the type of people you attract, it changes the way you respond, it changes the standards you hold, and most importantly, it changes the relationship you have with yourself, because now you are no longer seeking validation from people who cannot even validate themselves, You are no longer chasing connections that require you to shrink, to adjust, to compromise your truth. Instead, you are becoming someone who stands fully in their value. Even if that means standing alone for a while, because you now understand that being alone is not the same as being empty, and losing people is not the same as losing yourself, and the truth is, you didn't lose them. They lost access to you, they lost access to your energy, your loyalty, your presence, your light, and one day they will realize that, maybe not immediately, maybe not even soon, but eventually, because real people are rare, genuine energy is rare, and when someone walks away from that, they don't replace it easily, and that's not something you need to wait around for or prove. That's something life reveals on its own, and by the time that realization reaches them, you will already be in a different place, a stronger place, a clearer place, a place where you no longer need anything from them, and that is the real closure, not a conversation, not an apology, not an explanation, but your own growth, your own understanding, your own peace. Because when you finally see everything for what it truly was, you stop asking why it ended and you start being grateful that it did, because it saved you from investing more time, more energy, more emotion into something that was never going to give you what you truly deserve. And that realization doesn't make you bitter, it makes you wiser. It doesn't close your heart, it refines it. It teaches you how to love without losing yourself, how to give without overextending, how to trust without ignoring your intuition. And that is the transformation God was preparing you for all along, even through the pain, even through the confusion, even through the silence, because sometimes the greatest lessons come disguised as the greatest losses, and what you thought was the end was actually the beginning of a version of you that will never again question their worth just because someone else failed to recognize it. And as you continue moving forward, something inside you begins to settle in a way it never did before, not because everything is suddenly perfect, not because the memories have completely disappeared, but because you are finally seeing the truth without emotional distortion, and that truth is changing the way you interpret everything that happened, because what once felt like rejection is now starting to feel like protection, what once felt like abandonment is now revealing itself as alignment, and what once broke you is now quietly building a stronger, more aware, more grounded version of you that cannot be shaken the same way again. And this is where the real shift begins. Not when they left, but when you stop wishing they stayed, because that's the moment you take your power back completely, that's the moment you stop romanticizing what hurt you, that's the moment you stop replaying scenarios in your mind trying to rewrite an ending that was never meant to change, and instead you start focusing on what this experience revealed about you, about your capacity to love, your ability to endure, your strength to keep going even when things didn't make sense, and you realize that you didn't just survive this, you evolved through it, and that evolution is what makes this whole situation meaningful, because without it you would still be the same person tolerating the same patterns, ignoring the same signs, attracting the same type of connections that ultimately lead to the same kind of pain. But now something is different. Now you pause before you invest your energy. Now you observe before you trust completely. Now you listen to your intuition instead of silencing it, and that awareness becomes your new protection, not walls, not fear, but clarity. Because you're no longer afraid of people leaving, you're more aware of who deserves to stay, and that mindset shift changes everything about your future, because now you're not looking for someone to complete you, you're looking for someone who aligns with you, and there is a huge difference between those two things, because when you look for completion, you accept less just to avoid feeling empty, but when you look for alignment, you naturally filter out anything that doesn't match your energy, your values, your direction, and that's where God is leading you, into a space where you no longer settle out of fear, but choose out of clarity, and that clarity is the real blessing hidden inside everything you went through, because it didn't just show you who they were, it showed you who you are becoming. And who you are becoming cannot go back to who you used to be, even if you tried, even if you felt lonely, even if you missed the connection at times, because once your eyes are open, you cannot unsee the truth. Once your awareness expands, you cannot shrink it back down to fit old situations, and that's why some doors have to remain closed no matter how familiar they feel, because reopening them would mean betraying the growth you fought so hard to reach, and deep down you know that. Even if your emotions try to convince you otherwise sometimes, because healing doesn't erase attachment overnight, but it does give you the strength to choose differently despite it, and every time you choose your peace over your past, you reinforce that growth. You strengthen that new version of yourself that no longer depends on someone else's presence to feel whole, and that is the real victory here, not getting them back, not proving anything to them, but becoming someone who no longer needs to, and as this continues, you will start noticing something else happening, the things that once triggered you won't have the same effect. The memories that once felt heavy will start feeling distant, the urge to check, to wonder, to reach out will slowly fade, and in its place there will be a quiet confidence, a calm understanding that everything unfolded exactly the way it needed to, even if it didn't feel that way at the time, and that understanding brings peace, not forced peace, but real peace, the kind that doesn't depend on closure from anyone else, because you created it within yourself, and that is something no one can take away from you again. And what's even more powerful is that as you reach this state, you begin to attract different experiences, different people, different opportunities that reflect this new level of awareness, because energy doesn't lie, you attract what you embody. And now that you are no longer operating from confusion, attachment, or emotional dependency, you naturally draw in connections that are clearer, stronger, more balanced, and more genuine, and when those connections come, you will notice the difference immediately. There will be no guessing, no inconsistency, no feeling like you have to prove your worth or earn basic respect. Because the right people don't require that, the right people meet you where you are without making you question yourself, and that is what you deserve, not because of what you went through, but because of who you are, and the journey you just experienced was not meant to break you. It was meant to prepare you for that level of connection, that level of alignment, that level of understanding, and without this experience, you might not have recognized it when it arrived, you might have overlooked it, taken it for granted, or even pushed it away because it didn't match what you were used to. But now you're different, now you're ready, and that readiness is what God was building in you all along, even through the pain, even through the confusion, even through the silence, because nothing you experienced was wasted. Every moment, every emotion, every realization served a purpose in shaping the person you are right now, and the person you are right now is stronger, wiser, more aware, more grounded, and more aligned than ever before, and that is something to recognize, something to respect within yourself, because growth like this doesn't happen by accident, it happens through facing what most people avoid. through feeling what most people suppress. Through letting go when everything inside you wants to hold on, and you did that, even if it wasn't perfect, even if it took time, even if you struggled along the way, you still moved forward, and that matters more than anything else, because at the end of the day, this was never just about them leaving, this was about you rising, this was about you stepping into a version of yourself that no longer tolerates what once felt acceptable, that no longer questions their worth based on someone else's actions, that no longer chases what is not meant to stay, and that version of you is unstoppable, not because life will never challenge you again, but because now you have the awareness and the strength to handle those challenges without losing yourself in the process. And that is the real reason God exposed why some people walked away. Not just to show you who they were, but to reveal who you are becoming, and once you fully step into that, you will never again see their absence as a loss, you will see it as the moment everything in your life started aligning in your favor.